Well, hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Find the Intersection. My name is Paul Dezay. It's good to be with you. For today, we're going to be talking about the intersections for the week and also giving a preview of what's happening this Sunday at Sandy Hook United Methodist Church. So, hey, let's go ahead and start with the intersections for this week. Let's see here. Here we go. This is what we have been working on all week long. So as you could see, the upper left-hand corner was Monday's passage, Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. This is Jesus and the disciples crossing over the sea to the Gentile area, and they're in a boat. Jesus is asleep, and the storm comes, right? And the disciples are freaking out, and Jesus wakes up. Interesting that the word for wake up is the same as resurrection. Jesus rebukes the storm, says it to be silent, and there is the storm is still, right? This is a mega storm. It says great storm 3 times. So they're talking really big storm. And that's the reason for the storm background, by the way. And there's this question about faith is in the midst of these storms, and we can be afraid and have faith at the same time. But the problem is sometimes fear interferes with faith, and Jesus desires for us to trust him and have peace in the midst of storms so that fear doesn't destroy our faith. On Tuesday, the upper right-hand corner, we had 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 to 13. Back in chapter 5, Paul is talking about the ministry of reconciliation. And then in chapter 6, he starts off by saying, today is the day of salvation. Today is the day where God is bringing his love that changes people, that reconciles people together, that heals people. And it's happening now. It's happening. And so Paul is trying to communicate to this church that's very divided that they can participate just like he is participating in this work of reconciliation, in this salvation that is taking place now. But Jesus, and then Paul goes through it and lists all these difficulties and trials that he's going through. It's a reminder that even though today is the day of salvation, there are trials and there are storms happening as we speak. And God doesn't necessarily calm every storm, right? God doesn't come and make everything perfect. It isn't prosperity type of stuff. There are trials in the midst of the ministry of reconciliation, in the midst of doing what God has called us to do. And so for Paul, he's saying to the church in Corinth, why don't you open your lives up to this message of reconciliation? Open your lives up and let's be reconciled together. Open your lives up to what God is doing, because today is a day of salvation. And so that's the question for the church in Corinth, and it's our question too. Will we participate in the ministry of reconciliation, because today is the day of salvation? Job 38, 1 to 11, bottom left-hand corner, was Wednesday's passage, our Old Testament passage for the week. And Yahweh is answering Job's questions from the whirlwind. And he is not, even though Job has been asking questions, God doesn't destroy Job. God enlightens Job. Gives him an understanding of what God is up to and what Job is not up to, right? Where were you when the cornerstone was laid? Where were you when the foundations were laid? And those images of cornerstone and morning star are images that can point to Jesus. And then who shut up the seas with doors? And throughout scriptures, the idea of sea equals chaos or evil. And so God is the chaos tamer. God is the one who calms the storms of life. And Job can't do that. Job can't calm the storms of life. So again, this is an invitation to trust God, the chaos tamer. And then to yesterday's passage, Psalm 107, verses 1 to 3 and 23 and 32 is a psalm of thanks. Talks about God's steadfast love, his faithful love, his covenant love, his uncontrolling love. That in the second part, 23 to 32, talks about the sea again. Sea equals chaos and evil. And Israel isn't a seafaring people, but God calms the storm. So the intersections, let's talk about that for a second. Um, all really, three of the four talk about God calming the storms. The only one that did not talk about that is 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 to 13. But even though Paul listed all these trials, right? Paul listed all these tribulations that he was going through, these storms that he was going through. And so the metaphor of storm is very present. And so God calms the storms of life. God calms our storms, right? So that would be the first intersection that I came up with. And I think it's reassuring to us in the midst of storms that we go through, right? The second intersection has to do with power. God has the power, Jesus has the power to calm the storm, right? Now, this is one of those things that we have to be careful of because it's very easy for power to be construed with control, where God controls or overrides the free will of people. And God doesn't do that. We've talked about that on Sunday mornings, right? But God's power is his love, and his love changes things. That we, as people, have the opportunity to be co-laborers, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, to participate in what God is doing, right? So God's power isn't necessarily forcing people to do what they don't want to do. God's power is his love, and his love changes things. God cares about his disciples in the midst of the storm. God cares about you in the midst of the storm. So today is the day of salvation. God is coming to rescue you and calm the storms of life. The third intersection is that we can trust that God is working in the midst of our storms. God is working in the midst of our storms. God is the chaos tamer. God is saying to the storms, be still, right? God is working, and we can trust him in the midst of that. Today is the day of salvation. God is working right now as we speak. We can trust him. We have to understand that God works within the parameters that he has set, right? He has given us free will. And so we can be participants in what God is doing, or we can work against what God is doing. All of that affects what we see around us. So free will has an effect on the circumstances that we experience in life, right? So those are the intersections that I came up with. So let me put the chart away. Let me ask you, what intersections did you find this week in these passages? Now, for those who attend Sandy Hook United Methodist Church, I just want to give you a little preview of what's happening Sunday. Sunday is Communion Sunday, so we'll be taking communion together at the end of the service. But the title of the sermon is that God works to heal. God works to heal. And we're going to be talking about God's healing and how his healing works. He is working to bring healing to not just you and me, but the entire planet. And that's what God is up to. So we're going to be talking about healing. And of course, there's a lot of misconceptions about healing, and we'll get into a lot of those. I'll share a little bit about how God brought healing into my life during my journey with cancer. But the real question is why doesn't God heal other people? God healed me, but why didn't God heal that teenage girl that was getting chemo in the chemo bed next to me? And that's the hard question, and that's what we're going to be dealing with on Sunday. So I invite you to attend, bring your friends and your family, and we will worship the Lord. And by the way, Sunday's Father's Day. So we have, we will do it like we did for Mother's Day. We will honor and remember our dads by making a pledge to support a ministry local, and we'll share that with you on Sunday. So we'll honor and remember our dads. Hey, grace and peace, everyone. Take care. Have a good weekend.